Frédéric Chopin was born in Poland, west of Warsaw in 1810. He was a child prodigy. He was composing and writing poetry when he was 6, and he gave his first public concerto performance at the age of 8. His mother was a piano teacher, and his father played the flute and violin. Most of Chopin's music was written for piano. He wrote 59 mazurkas, which is sort of like a Polish dance, 27 etudes, which are like piano exercises, 27 preludes, 21 nocturnes, and several waltzes for the instrument. After completing his musical education and following the Russian suppression of the Polish 1830 uprising, he settled in Paris in September 1831 and never returned to Poland. While he was in the city, he became friends with great composers like Mendelssohn, Berlioz, and Franz Liszt. He made his living as a piano teacher and occasionally public performer. From 1837 to 1847, he carried on a relationship with the French woman writer George Sand. Of course, she called herself George because they didn't really accept women authors in those days. Sadly, for most of his life, Chopin suffered from poor health. He died in Paris in 1849 at the age of 39. So as I mentioned, the majority of his music was written for solo piano. He did write 2 concertos for piano and orchestra. Now, as for his preludes, we're going to look at one of his preludes. Chopin wrote his preludes, Opus 28, between 1835 and 1839. That was the year when the set was published. It consists of 24 pieces for solo piano, 1 in each of the 24 keys. It's very much like the Well-Tempered Clavier by Bach, and it's organized according to the circle of fifths. Now we're going to be looking at Prelude number 20 in C minor, and this is one of the most famous of the preludes. So first we're going to examine the chords that Chopin uses to harmonize the melody that he wrote, and I'll tell you, he packs a lot into just 13 measures. And after we look at the chords that he uses, we're going to go back and learn some musical terms that might be new to you. And we will uncover these as we closely examine the amazing harmony that Chopin employs. Let's start by looking at the chord progression that we have in this piece. Just figure out what chords that Chopin is using. Now, of course, if you follow the top notes of these chords, you have the actual melody. But each one of those melody notes is filled out with some very thick chords. So we're in the key of C minor, as you can see. C minor, F minor 7, G7. I'll explain a little bit more what this note is as we go through this. Right now, let's just take a look at the basic chords. Here's A flat, D flat, E flat 7, A flat, G7, C7, F minor, C minor, D7 to G, and another D7 to G. And then we have this beautiful progression here. C minor, A flat over C. This is B diminished. G minor over B flat. A minor 7. Now, I've called this chord A flat 7 flat 5, but that's not really what it is. And I will explain as we go what that chord actually is. Now we have G, G over F. We do have some cool inversions here. C minor over E flat, F minor, G over B, C minor, A flat, D flat, G7, and C minor, and then this repeats. There's that D flat again. And then G7 resolves to C minor. Let's go back and take a closer look at this chord progression and see what we can find out. First of all, if you look at measure 2 through 4, we have several modulations. In measure 1, straight C minor, very familiar. But look what happens here in measure 2, our first modulation. So this A flat is the major 6 chord in the key of C minor, but this D flat, this chord actually has a special name, which we will get to as we explain some of the concepts that might be new to you as we go through this piece together. Right now, we can call it the 4 chord in the key of A flat. Here's the 5-7 in A flat, and now we're in the key of A flat. But then immediately, this is the 5 chord of the 5. We can call it the 5 of the 5. This is the 5 of the 4 chord. Now we have 4 and 1. Let me go through that again. So actually, I misspoke. This is just the 5 chord. But instead of going back to C minor, Chopin goes to C7, which could be called the 5 of the 4. The 4 chord is F minor. So it's like we're a little bit into the key of F minor, but not really, because it leads right back to C minor. But then look what happens here in measure 4. We have this D7, which leads to the 5 chord. But in the key of G, this is the 1 chord, and D7 is the 5, and G is 1. I hope you're able to follow this, because these modulations go by quickly. In other words, it looks like Chopin modulated to G major. Well, how did he do that? Well, the first chord in measure 4 is D7. And we can understand that as the 5 chord of the 5. In other words, it leads us to the next chord. It's like we were in the key of G, but not really, because this is the 5 chord in the key of C minor, but we go to this. Now this is the 5 chord in the key of G. So how does he get to the key of G? Well, the first chord is D7. It goes directly to G. But then the next 2 chords are essentially the same 2 chords, D7 and G. But now it sounds like we have ended up in the key of G. And he could have continued on in the key of G. Could have been something like this. Measure 4. But it doesn't go any further. But it really sounds like we're now in the key of G. Now what Chopin did here was added something in the melody that changed our perception. And he added this B in the melody. And this is what is known as an appoggiatura. So what is an appoggiatura? That's what you call this note. It's a musical note, or an ornament, if you like, that consists of an added non-chord note. This note, this B, is not part of the D7 chord, but it quickly resolves to the A. And so by putting this non-chord tone on a strong beat, this accents the appoggiatura and delays the appearance of the principal expected chord note. Now, there are other types of non-harmonic tones which can really add interest to a melody. But we'll need to come back to that in another video. But what this appoggiatura, that B, makes it sound like, yes, we are definitely now in the key of G, because that B is part of the G major scale. And then it goes directly back to C minor. So Chopin added this note. If I can play it, he added this note to the chord on the third beat of measure 4 instead of the simple 7th chord. Listen to how it sounds if we just play. It just doesn't have the same color. It just doesn't have the same interest. So this was one of Chopin's trademarks, if you like, putting these non-harmonic tones, or this, in this case, an appoggiatura. And so this was something that Chopin often did to add color to his harmonies. And this note gives you a sense of closure in the new, put new in quotes, into the new key. But it goes right back to C minor, because this G major chord is the dominant chord in the key of C minor. Now, look what we have here in measures 5 and 6. Notice this descending bass line. This is called a chromatic fourth. Now, there's a fancier name, which I'll put on the screen, but I don't expect you to remember it, and I might not even get the pronunciation of it quite right anyway. So this is called a chromatic fourth. It's basically a melody or a melodic fragment, or this bass line here, and it spans a perfect fourth. This one goes from C down to G, and all the notes, or at least most of the notes of the chromatic scale, are filled in. After reaching G, Chopin takes it even further, and it goes from F to E flat. Now, take a look at the chords that Chopin puts on top of this. There's our A flat over C. This is B diminished. Just notice how the notes are all arranged differently. Oh, and another thing about the appoggiatura I should mention. There's a couple of other of them in here too. A couple of other appoggiaturas. Notice here in measure 1. There's a non-harmonic note. Now you could actually call this G augmented, but it's actually, you could also say that this is an appoggiatura, because it lands on the strong beat, which is beat 3, and then it resolves to the proper G7. So actually these two notes, almost like a double appoggiatura. And then he does it again. That C is not part of the E flat 7 chord. But notice what a rich sound we get. And then Chopin loves his appoggiaturas. This gives it a yearning, tragic sound. And then here we have it again, and this makes it feel like we're going into the key of G. Now it gets very quiet, and we have this mysterious series of chords. Now, in measure 6, this is where we have that interesting chord. I labeled it A flat 7 flat 5, but there's really a better way to identify it. This is actually what we call an augmented 6th chord. Augmented 6th chords are typically built on the flatted submediant. Now, if you remember all the names of the notes, tonic, dominant, subdominant, the submediant is the sixth note of the scale. These augmented sixth chords, they usually occur in minor keys. Now you can see that this chord is built on A flat. That is the flattened sixth note of the C melodic minor scale. There's our A, but now it's flat. And we're going to build a chord on that A flat. And we have an interval of an augmented sixth between the A flat and the F. Now, there are actually three common types of augmented sixth chords that you'll come across. And all three of these chords include the major third and the interval of an augmented sixth. The difference is that there are other notes that are added. Now, in this case, we've added a D. There are actually three types of augmented sixth chords. There's the Italian augmented sixth, which is just the three notes. And then there's the French augmented sixth. That's the one we have here. There's also the German, which sounds a lot like a seventh chord. Now, we'll discuss this more fully in another video, but for now, this one is a French augmented sixth chord. And it really wants to resolve. And so you have the bass moving down and the sixth moving up. Now we have a melody on top of that. But here's the basic movement of this augmented sixth chord. That's the Italian augmented sixth. And the German. Here we have the French augmented sixth chord. Now, in measures 8 and 12, Chopin uses what is known as a Phrygian chord. That's this D flat chord. This is a chord that's built on the second note of the Phrygian mode, in this case, C Phrygian. Now, if you remember your modes, and I've done some videos on the modes, you may need to go back and review that. If we play the Phrygian mode on all white keys, it starts on E. And it goes half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. So in the key of C, we'd go from C to D flat, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C. So if we build a chord on the D flat, we use the D flat, the F, and the A flat. That is our Phrygian chord. And notice this chord is in root position. If it had been in first inversion, it would be called a Neapolitan sixth chord. Now, I realize I'm introducing several new terms in this video, but we're going to come back to these Neapolitan chords and these augmented sixth chords, and I'll explain a little bit more about them and expand on them a bit. But by using this Phrygian chord, built on the notes of the Phrygian mode, the C Phrygian mode, by using this chord, Chopin ends up with this augmented fourth jump. It's a very unusual thing. It creates a very dramatic sound, the sound of tragedy. I mean, augmented intervals like that were supposedly forbidden in basic harmony. And he actually does this twice. Right at the end there in measures 12. The whole tone of this prelude is very tragic, very heavy, very weighty. I'm going to play through it just so you can hear it. Here we go. This is Prelude in C minor by Frédéric Chopin, Opus 28, number 20. Chopin, a master of harmony, a master of chord progressions. We'll be coming back to his music in the future. He shows us what the possibilities are, and some of the things he came up with were considered rather startling in his day. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed our somewhat deep dive into this very famous piece. We didn't even talk about the structure or anything else. I really wanted to concentrate on the chord progressions, on the harmonies, and introduce you to some musical terms that perhaps you're not familiar with. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Liking the video helps YouTube get it out to more people. If you'd like to support my work, you can go to my Patreon page. The link is at the top of the description. So thank you once again for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any comments, any suggestions, please be sure to leave those in the comment section. I make it a point to answer all the questions that come up, or at least as many of them as I can, and respond to as many comments as I possibly can. Thank you again. I look forward to speaking to you in the next one.